My wife got an STD and ended up in the hospital after the infidelity with her boss was exposed. I divorced her. That sentence takes about 4 seconds to say. Living it took 8 months and cost me more than I'm going to calculate tonight. What she expected, once everything came apart, was that I'd be too embarrassed to push back, that I'd want it quiet and fast and done. She was wrong about that. I still have the joint card statement I pulled from our filing cabinet the night everything started. I haven't thrown it away yet. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I was looking for the car insurance renewal. It comes every October, and our insurance company still mails paper notices like it's 2004, which I've always appreciated because paper is harder to accidentally delete. I was going through the second drawer of the filing cabinet, the one with the household expenses, when I pulled out the wrong quarter statement. I almost put it back. I almost did. But the third line item on the second page caught my eye because it was a hotel name I recognized in a town 40 miles from our house. On a Tuesday night 8 weeks earlier, when Elena had told me she had a client dinner in the city. The charge was $187. Not a lot of money, but specific enough to mean something specific. I sat down on the floor next to the filing cabinet, which is not a thing I normally do, and I checked the date against my phone calendar. That week I'd been on a job site outside the city. I'd gotten home at 9 in the evening to an empty house and eaten leftovers standing at the counter. Elena had come in after midnight and said the dinner ran long, the clients liked to close out the bar, she was exhausted. She'd tell me about it tomorrow. She never did. I didn't ask. I put the statement on the kitchen table and opened the email app on my phone. We have a joint account I manage, hotel rewards, airline miles, that kind of thing, because I'm the one who actually tracks the points and redeems them before they expire. Elena is signed up as a secondary member. I searched the inbox for the hotel name from the statement, and there it was. A points accrual email from that property, same date, confirming her stay. The account name was hers. The room was registered in her name. I took screenshots, both of them. I saved them to a folder on my phone labeled Tax Docs 2024 because I needed a second to think and I didn't want to put them somewhere obvious. Then I put my phone face down on the table and looked at the kitchen for a while. The dishes were done, the counters were clean. Elena was working late again, her words from the text she'd sent at 6, and the house was very quiet, and I was sitting there trying to decide if I had actually just found what I thought I'd found, or if there was an explanation I hadn't considered yet. A work booking that got charged wrong, a points glitch, something. I'm an engineer, I work in infrastructure. My entire job is checking whether things hold up under the conditions they're supposed to hold up under. And I knew, sitting there, that the explanation I needed didn't exist. The dinner was in the city. The hotel was 40 miles south. The charge was on our joint card, and the points went to her loyalty account. And I had been home alone, eating leftover pasta at 9 o'clock, while she was 40 miles away, at a hotel she'd registered in her name. 3 days later, my phone rang at 2:17 in the afternoon, while I was on a site visit reviewing drainage specs with a contractor. Unknown number. I let it ring, then called it back, and it was a hospital ER. Elena had been brought in. Severe abdominal pain, high fever. They'd started IV antibiotics. She was stable. I was her emergency contact. I drove 40 minutes to that hospital, still in my work clothes with my hard hat on the passenger seat. I sat in the waiting room for almost 2 hours before a nurse told me they'd moved Elena to a room and she was resting. The attending physician asked to speak with me privately. She was measured about it, chose her words carefully, but she laid it out. The working diagnosis was pelvic inflammatory disease, an ascending infection typically caused by an untreated sexually transmitted infection. And they needed to know about relevant recent history, partners, that kind of thing. She didn't say, "Your wife has been sleeping with someone else." She didn't have to. I sat in the hospital parking garage for 11 minutes after that conversation. I still had my hard hat in my hand. At some point, I put it on the passenger seat next to my phone, and I noticed my phone had a missed call from a number I didn't recognize, different from the hospital's. I didn't call it back yet. I went inside. Elena was awake when I got to the room, pale and uncomfortable, with an IV in her left arm and a look on her face that told me she already knew what the doctor had said to me. She watched me come through the door and she didn't say hello. She said, "I need you to not make this worse right now." I pulled the chair over and sat down. I'd brought her phone charger from home. It was on the counter by the door and I'd grabbed it automatically. and I set it on the bedside table. Then I asked her how long. Marc, how long, Elena? She looked at the ceiling for a moment. 4 months, she said. She didn't offer a name. I didn't push for one. I picked up my coffee cup, set it back down, and told her I'd be back later. I left before I said something I couldn't take back, which took more effort than anything else I did that day. I sat in the parking garage again. I called Priya, who is my closest friend, and works structural at the same firm, and I said, I need to not answer questions yet. Can I come over tonight? She said yes without hesitating, and I appreciated that more than I told her at the time. In the parking garage before I drove to Priya's, I called my GP's office and scheduled an STD panel for the next morning. The receptionist was professional. I was professional. I wrote the appointment in my work calendar under medical, and then sat there for another minute and a half before starting the car. At Priya's, I showed her the screenshots on my phone. She made me send them to her email while she was making coffee, said, for backup, in the tone people use when they mean something more serious than backup. She also looked at the missed call I'd ignored. I'd already looked it up by then. LinkedIn had a public profile, and the number matched a cell listed on a marketing agency's directory page for a VP named Derek Holloway. My phone rang again while Priya was still on the other side of the kitchen counter. Same number. I answered. He introduced himself as Elena's colleague and said he was calling to check in. I said, I know who you are. Don't call this number again. I hung up. I screenshotted the call log, searched his name, confirmed the match to the LinkedIn page, and emailed everything to Priya's address. She raised an eyebrow over her coffee mug and said, Okay, so that's the guy. I said yes. She said she was sorry. I said I knew. Elena was discharged 2 days later and went to her mother Diane's house. She sent me one text. I know this is a lot. Can we talk when things calm down? I don't want to lose everything. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the counter and went to make dinner. The chicken needed another 8 minutes, and I stood at the stove and watched the timer. My STD panel results came back negative 2 days after that. I held the printout for a moment, then put it in the same filing cabinet drawer as the joint card statement. Then I called my brother Ray, who lives out of state and who went through a divorce 4 years ago, that he doesn't talk about much. I hadn't spoken to him in 3 months, and I opened with, I need an attorney. He gave me a name without asking why. Carla Voss. He said she was the best in the metro. He said to tell her he sent me. I booked an appointment for 3 days out. I hadn't answered Elena's text. Carla Voss's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and her waiting room had the specific kind of quiet that comes from good soundproofing and clients who don't want to be overheard. She was direct in a way I immediately respected. No preamble, no sympathy warm-up, just a yellow legal pad and a pen and her full attention. I put the printed card statement on her desk, then the screenshots of the loyalty program emails, then the 3-year financial summary I'd built in a spreadsheet over the previous 2 evenings. She went through everything without commenting until she'd seen all of it. Then she told me what I needed to know. The state allows fault-based divorce, and documented infidelity is relevant to alimony determination. It reduces or eliminates a claim. My disproportionate financial contribution, which the bank statements and the spreadsheet made clear, further supported my position. I'd been covering roughly 65% of household expenses for 2 of the last 3 years, partly because Elena had 2 separate stretches of reduced income that she'd described as slow periods at the firm. I'd covered the difference without making it a conversation. My spreadsheet had those numbers because I track household finances the way I track anything that matters, in writing, with dates. Carla told me not to move out of the house, not to make any financial transfers, not to respond to Derek Holloway under any circumstances, and to document everything going forward in writing. She said it the way someone says something they need to say before a client makes it harder for them. I said I understood. She made a note. Before I left, she asked me something I wasn't expecting. She said, "Do people usually feel this calm this fast?" And I said, I thought she was asking me. She said no, she'd seen enough of this to be asking generally. I said I didn't know about other people. I knew that sitting in the hospital parking garage was the moment I'd actually felt it, the grief and the anger arriving at the same time, and that the clinic waiting room the next morning, sitting there not knowing whether my body had been put at risk without my consent, had converted something. The grief was still there. It just had company now. I went back to work. I had a drainage assessment due at the end of the week and a project meeting the following Monday. and the work was the same as it had always been, which helped. My manager, a careful and precise woman named Judith, who has been running our department for 11 years, asked me once at the coffee machine if everything was okay. I said I had some personal stuff. She nodded and didn't ask again, which is exactly what I needed from her. Over the following 2 weeks, Elena stayed at Diane's and started working on her version of events. I know this is because 2 of our shared friends texted me within 3 days of each other, both using phrases that were close enough in structure to suggest a common source. One said he'd heard I wasn't responding to Elena and asked if I was okay. The other said Elena seemed really broken up and hoped we could work it out. I replied to both of them with some version of, "We're handling it privately, thanks for reaching out." I didn't share details with anyone except Priya and Carla. Diane called me directly at the end of the second week. Her tone was careful and slightly rehearsed, like she'd thought about the call before making it. She said she hadn't known the details, that she'd only heard Elena's side, and that she didn't know the other man was married. She said, "I didn't know the details, Marcus." I said, "I know, Diane." There was a pause. She said she hoped I could find some compassion for a situation that was complicated. I said I'd think about it. After we hung up, I wrote the call in the contact log I'd started keeping. Date, person, summary of conversation. It was a habit from work. If something might matter later, document it. What I didn't expect was what I found when I opened the joint email account to forward a utility bill to Carla's office. There was a promotional email from the same hotel chain, one of those loyalty program newsletters with a "You've earned a free night" banner across the top. I clicked through to the account. The dashboard showed the full points history, which I'd never looked at before because I only managed the airline miles side. The hotel loyalty account showed 6 separate visits to the same property over the last 7 months. 6. Elena had told me 4 months. In the hospital, when I asked how long, she said 4 months. I'd already known from the card statement and the first loyalty email that the one I'd found wasn't the beginning. But 6 visits over 7 months meant she'd been lying about the timeline by at least 3 months, and it meant the 4 months she admitted to had been a number designed to minimize, not confess. I took a screenshot of the full points history page and added it to the folder on my phone. Then I emailed it to Priya and to Carla separately, with no explanation, because they both already had the context. Carla's assistant replied the next morning, confirming receipt. Priya texted, 7 months. She looked you in the eye in a hospital bed and said 4. I didn't respond to that because there wasn't anything to say. Elena's reconciliation request came through her mother a week after that. The framing was, Elena wanted to meet, not with lawyers, just to talk. She wasn't trying to make things worse. She understood this was hard. She just wanted them to have a conversation like 2 adults. I told Diane I was willing to meet, but that I'd be bringing my attorney and that Elena should bring hers. Diane relayed this to Elena. Elena agreed. She showed up at Carla's office without a lawyer. I noticed that immediately. She sat across the conference table from me and Carla, and the first thing she said was that she didn't want this to get ugly, that she thought they could handle it between themselves without it becoming a legal fight. Her proposed terms: split assets 50-50, she waives alimony, they finalize fast and quietly. I watched her deliver this, and I understood the actual offer. She wanted the process to move quickly and without discovery, because discovery would surface 7 months of financial behavior on her end, and whatever records existed connecting her to Derek professionally. Carla asked one question. She said, "Are you aware that your employer has an open HR inquiry related to workplace conduct?" Elena's expression shifted. It was subtle. She stopped blinking for a moment, then blinked twice. She said she didn't know what that was referring to. Carla said, "We'll be proceeding with full financial disclosure and discovery." Elena looked at me. I looked back at her. There was something she seemed to want me to do, intervene or soften it, or be the person who said, "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." I had been that person for 5 years. I didn't say anything. Before the meeting ended, I said one thing to her directly. I said, "Tell me the actual start date, not your attorney, not your mother, you, right now." She said 4 months. I nodded. I picked up my folder and waited for Carla to close the meeting. 2 days after that, Derek Holloway contacted me again. This time, it was a LinkedIn message and an email to my work address, sent within an hour of each other. The email said he thought they could talk man to man, that he understood this was difficult, and that he thought both of them had an interest in keeping things from getting out of control. The phrase he used was out of control. I forwarded both to Carla without reading them a second time. Carla sent a cease and desist to Derek's personal attorney, citing harassment and unsolicited contact with an opposing party's represented spouse. His attorney responded formally, which meant the exchange was now on record. I reported the contact to my firm's HR department as an unsolicited communication to my workplace from a third party regarding a personal legal matter. Judith received the report, documented it, and sent me a brief confirmation email. I added it to the log. Priya heard about it from me over lunch. She was eating a sandwich and she said, without looking up, "He emailed your work address." I said yes. She said, "That's not a smart person making a careful decision." I said I was aware of that. The smear campaign was quieter than I expected. Elena wasn't posting publicly. She was too careful for that. But word was moving through the extended social network in the way things move when someone is working the phones. The version I heard back from two different directions was that Marc had been emotionally unavailable for years, that Elena had been lonely in the marriage, that she'd made a mistake, but the marriage had already been over, and that now Marc was refusing to even consider counseling, which was making a hard situation worse. The counseling part was technically accurate. Elena had asked once, about 3 weeks after the hospital, whether I'd be open to couples counseling. I'd said no. What the version of events going around didn't include was that she'd asked while she was still at her mother's house, before she'd produced a single piece of accountability, before she'd corrected the timeline, before she'd said anything that wasn't designed to manage outcomes. The ask for counseling had arrived at the same time as the offer to settle fast and quietly. I didn't think those two things were unconnected. My brother Ray called to check in at the end of the month. He asked how Carla was. I said she was good. He said she'd been good for him too, and we left it at that. Carla called me on a Friday afternoon while I was in the car driving back from a site visit. She said Elena's attorney had filed a formal counterclaim. The argument was constructive abandonment, the position that Marc's emotional unavailability had caused the marriage's breakdown, which, if accepted, would restore Elena's eligibility for alimony. Carla said the argument wasn't strong, but it wasn't frivolous. It required Elena to demonstrate she'd communicated unmet needs and been refused. She said I needed to think about what evidence existed of my actual participation in the marriage. Photos, texts, shared calendar entries, anything showing a functioning partnership over the last year or more. I said I thought I had that. She said, "Go look tonight." I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd found the card statement, where I'd sat on the floor with the filing cabinet drawer open. And I opened my phone's camera roll, then the shared calendar, then the text archive. 14 months of dinners I'd planned, a weekend trip to the coast, an anniversary reservation I'd made 6 weeks in advance at the restaurant Elena had mentioned wanting to try. A text from Elena 13 months ago, "I feel so lucky. Thank you for this weekend." I forwarded it to Carla that night with a note saying there was more where that came from. The constructive abandonment argument had a problem, and now we both knew it. Carla scheduled Elena's deposition for a Thursday morning, 3 weeks out. I wasn't in the room, standard procedure, but Carla had prepared thoroughly, and she called me that afternoon to walk through what had happened. Elena had maintained, under oath, that the affair began approximately 4 months before discovery. She'd been asked specifically whether the relationship with Derek had ever been personal prior to that period. She said no. Carla had then produced the hotel loyalty account history. 6 visits over 7 months, with dates, with point accruals tied to Elena's registered account, with the first entry predating Elena's sworn 4 months by 10 weeks. Elena's attorney had attempted to argue that the earlier visits were work-related travel that incidentally used the joint loyalty account. Carla had produced the hotel's location, 40 miles from the city, 30 miles from any client address in Elena's firm's publicly listed portfolio. She had also produced Derek's LinkedIn profile showing his title and office location, and the joint card statement with the original charge I'd found in the filing cabinet. Elena had registered loyalty points to our joint account on 6 visits to a hotel that had no plausible connection to her professional work, across a timeline that directly contradicted her sworn testimony. Her attorney hadn't objected loudly to any of it. That told me something. Then the HR file arrived. It came through discovery, produced by Elena's own attorney as part of a package intended to establish Elena's professional standing and earnings trajectory, the foundation of her career disruption argument for alimony. It was a 23-page document. On page 17, under the section marked Internal Inquiries, there was a single notation: Open Inquiry, Q3, Workplace Conduct, Supervisory Relationship. Elena's attorney had produced the document that confirmed the investigation existed. Carla called it the cleanest piece of accidental self-defeat she'd seen in 2 years of practice. I didn't laugh, but I understood why she almost did. I was at my kitchen table when she told me about it, and I remember I got up and poured a glass of water and stood at the counter for a minute. Not because I was surprised exactly, more because I was doing the math on how many evenings I'd spent in that house, eating dinner alone, assuming Elena was working late for a difficult boss, believing her because I had no concrete reason not to. The HR file confirmed the affair was a documented workplace violation. It had nothing to do with me or what I had or hadn't provided emotionally. It was a choice she'd made and then hidden and then lied about the duration of under oath. I drank the water, went back to the table, and emailed Carla to confirm I'd understood the update. Then I went to bed. The settlement conference was scheduled for a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the deposition. Both parties and both attorneys in a conference room at a mediation firm downtown. I wore the same jacket I'd worn to Carla's office the first time, which wasn't a statement, just the jacket I wear to things that matter. Elena came in with her attorney and sat across the table. She looked tired. I noticed that and then stopped noticing it, because it wasn't information I needed. Elena's attorney opened by acknowledging that the discovery process had been thorough and that her client was prepared to negotiate in good faith. He proposed a 50-50 split of liquid marital assets, no alimony, a clean settlement. It was the same offer Elena had brought to Carla's office 2 months earlier, before discovery, before the deposition, before the HR file. The fact that it was the same number after all of that told me exactly how much their position had shifted. Carla presented our counter. Given documented infidelity and the state's fault-based framework, the asset split should reflect my disproportionate financial contribution across the marriage. She put the spreadsheet on the table, 3 years of household expense ratios, bank statements attached. The counter was 62 to 38 in my favor. No alimony. Elena's attorney conferred with her in a voice too low to hear. It lasted about 40 seconds. Then Elena said, "Fine." One word, not "I understand," not "you're right," not "I'm sorry," fine. It landed in the room and nobody added to it. Carla made a note. Her attorney made a note. I straightened the edge of my folder on the table in front of me and waited for the paperwork process to begin. I didn't look at Elena again during the meeting, not because I was performing anything, but because there wasn't anything left to see. The settlement was signed and finalized over the following 3 weeks. The house stayed with me. It had been mine before the marriage, purchased 2 years before Elena and I met, with my name on the deed and my financing from a mortgage I'd qualified for on my own salary. It had never been part of the marital asset negotiation because it had never been a marital asset. Elena's attorney had tested this early in the process and found no ground. I don't think Elena had known, when she'd imagined a contested divorce, that the house she'd lived in for 4 years had never legally been hers to contest. 3 days after the final paperwork was signed, Priya came over with takeout, and we ate at the kitchen table, and she asked me if it felt like what she thought it would feel like. I said I wasn't sure what she'd thought it would feel like. She said she'd imagine relief with some sadness attached. I said that was about right. She asked if I was okay. I said I was going to be okay, and to ask me again in 6 months. She said she'd hold me to it. The news about Derek came through indirectly, the way most news does when you've deliberately kept yourself out of the information loop. Priya mentioned it, carefully, about 2 weeks after the settlement. A mutual acquaintance's social post had noted a leadership change at Derek's firm. He'd been moved to a non-supervisory role. No announcement, no explanation in the post, just the new title and the implication anyone paying attention could read. I didn't know what happened with his marriage. I hadn't asked, and I wasn't going to. That was a consequence of choices he'd made, moving through channels I hadn't opened. Diane called me 10 days after the settlement was finalized. I almost didn't pick up. I did, because I thought she deserved a conversation, and because I didn't want to be the person who disappeared without a word from everyone attached to 5 years of a life. She asked if there was any way I could have found it in myself to try counseling before it got to this point. I said, "Diane, she was with him for 7 months while I was paying the mortgage and trusting her. I'm not sure counseling would have addressed what actually happened." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "She told me 4 months." I said, "I know she did." Another pause. She said she was sorry. I said I knew she was. We stayed on the phone for another moment without either of us having anything else to say, and then the call ended. I wrote it in the log out of habit, then closed the notebook and put it in the filing cabinet drawer. Elena's final contact came as a text, late on a Wednesday evening, about 2 weeks after the settlement was complete. I was on the couch with the TV on, not really watching it. The message said, "I hope you know I genuinely loved you. I just needed something you couldn't give me. I'm sorry it ended this way." I read it twice. The construction was familiar by then. The apology built around a deficit assigned to me. The love confirmed in a sentence that also redirected responsibility. It was the same language the marriage had ended with as the marriage had sustained. I recognized it without feeling anything sharp about recognizing it, which I took as a sign that something had actually changed. I typed, "Take care of yourself, Elena." Sent it. Set the phone down. I didn't block her that night. I waited 3 days. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe I was sitting with it, or maybe I was checking whether I'd feel differently about it in 72 hours. I didn't feel differently. I blocked her on the 3rd day, quietly, mid-afternoon, between a work call and making lunch. The practical steps after that were unglamorous and necessary. I removed Elena from the joint email account and changed the password. I removed her from the hotel loyalty program as a secondary member. The airline miles account I kept as is because she'd never used it. I went through the house and dealt with the things that needed dealing with in the way you deal with them when a 5-year marriage ends. Some things boxed, some things kept, some decisions made without any particular ceremony. The filing cabinet drawer I left until last. I opened it one evening after work, standing in the kitchen in my coat, and I went through what was there. The tax files. The car insurance renewal I'd eventually found, back in October, 2 drawers over from where I'd been looking. My STD test results, dated, negative, from Dr. Okonkwo's office, which I'd put in there because it was where I put things that mattered and needed to stay organized. The joint card statement with the hotel charge on the 3rd line of the 2nd page, which had started all of this. I took the card statement out. I looked at it for a moment. I put it in the paper recycling bag under the sink because Carla had the copies and I didn't need the original anymore, and because keeping it in the drawer felt like keeping something in my chest that could come out now. At the back of the drawer, behind the tax files, was the loyalty account printout, the one showing all 6 visits over 7 months, the one that had ended the deposition and the settlement argument simultaneously. I left that one where it was, closed the drawer. I wasn't ready to deal with that one yet. That felt honest. I had a project meeting in the morning, a drainage assessment in the afternoon, a site I'd been working for 3 months, a scope I understood well. I set my alarm, put my phone on the charger, and went to bed in a house that was mine, with a drawer that was almost empty, which was more than I'd had in October when I'd been looking for the car insurance renewal and found something else instead.